everyone. Welcome to the Iron and Steel Museum. Tonight we have a great lecture about the local union, United Steelworkers Union. Tonight, but first, a couple of housekeeping items. Number one, you do have some, I call it a steelworker card in front of you. They were printed by Vonie here. The question is, what does it mean to me to be or to have been a steelworker? So we ask that you think about it and fill it out, whether you've been a steelworker or not. It doesn't really matter. But what do you think it means to be a steelworker, whether you've worked in the industry or not? And then if you have come up with something good, you're welcome to share it a little bit later. If not, we will at least share it amongst the museum and the union here. We do have two upcoming events coming up in both October and November. First is next Saturday, which is our Mansions and Steam tour. We are going to visit Primitive Hall, and we are going to also visit the Commercial Steam Museum in Delaware, which does have the largest collection of Stanley steamers operating in the nation. So we will visit that. There are seats still available on the bus if you would like to join us. And then our next lecture is the first Thursday in November. So it's November 7th, and it is a steelworker housing lecture. We do have a local Westchester University professor coming on site to talk about planned housing in industrial communities, including the Midvale Steel housing here in the Coatesville area. To introduce our two speakers tonight, first we have Vonie Long, who is the United Steelworkers Union Local 1165 president, and he is also maintenance technician electrician in the West Side Maintenance at ArcelorMittal Coatesville. Vonie has worked more than 25 years at the Coatesville Steel site, and he is the third generation in his family to have worked for the Coatesville Steel as well. And we also have Dave McLimans, president of the Chester County Central Labor Council and former vice president of the USW Local 1165. Dave is retired from Lucan Steel Company. So please join me in welcoming our speakers tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting us, and I appreciate you to come out to hear us talk a little bit about our history as a union and a labor movement, and also a little bit of how we influence the community and all of society.
Yeah. Little background on me. I started as a steelworker at Bud Company Trailer Division up on Route 100. Used to be Gindy Manufacturing. We were steelworkers there, and I worked there for 18 and a half years before we shut down. Then I got hired at Lucan's, and something I said to my dad, I'd never work here because you get too dirty. Well, needless to say, I worked as a crane operator for 9 months, and then I went to the melt shop to get real dirty. But yeah, it's a great place to work. It was a great place, great occupation. It's honorable work. It's not something. I was told one day that when our contract was up, a guy out of Gillham's on 82 told me, you guys just go to work and go to sleep. I said, well, if you can find me one of those jobs, I'd be glad to have one, because I haven't slept yet in all the years I've been there. But 26 years in the melt shop was enough for me. I was 67 when I retired. It was time to go, I think. But I do miss it. I miss making steel. There was nothing like making steel. Crank her up and let her go. So anyway, thank you. So where you at?
The seeds of our union were planted in the late 1800s. They were seeds of commitment, solidarity, and a common interest to fight for better conditions for working men and women everywhere. And mainly the focus was on men at the time, but we eventually went and helped our sisters also. Through wars and recessions, good times and bad, we established our roots. We had better wages, job security, reasonable hours, and safer working conditions. Thanks to the commitment and activism of our members, our branches reach out to lead a movement to stop child labor, provide aid for injured workers, fight for retirement security, advocate for civil and human rights, and much more. Today we are a strong union bold and proud. We continue to believe in a better tomorrow, and together we still are standing up and fighting back for everyone.
One of the things that people don't realize when you say commitment, back in the day before the laws changed to permit you to be a member of a union or meet, they would send the cops out to break up your meeting. You weren't allowed to meet as a group. So anyway.
What year was that?
What year? 1937. I believe that's when it was. And Roosevelt was fully with us, with the union movement. Well, it was because of UAW. They shut down their factories. They just wouldn't leave and didn't do any work till the companies conceded, which is the only way to go, I guess. If it gets it done, it gets it done. That's what matters. So timeline is that, in 1792, the first craft union was formed in Philadelphia. They were shoemakers. Next quarter century, we saw a small and scattered formation of craft unions, mainly in Philadelphia and New York. There was a printers union somewhere in that mix. I don't remember what year, but in 1819, the United States suffered a deep depression and widespread unemployment, and most of these early labor unions were dissolved. 1827 brought a major push for the 10-hour workday instead of 12 and 16 in New York, successful enough to make this shorter workday universal within a year. So,
But just in New York.
Yeah, just in New York. My grandfather worked here at Bethlehem Steel until whenever they shut down the pipe mill, somewhere in the 30s, and I don't know how they did it. I mean, he and my great uncle from Acklen, my grandfather would ride from Cochranville to Acklen and get Uncle Walt, and they'd get on the trolley and ride into Bethlehem Steel and work 12-hour days. I don't know where he got time to sleep unless it's on the trolley. It's amazing to me. So anyway, 1830 saw trade unionism revive, and locals and even labor councils of multiple trades were forming in larger cities. And then in 1837, the Depression wiped out everybody, wiped everything out. So,
And that's a pattern we see. Times of economic hardship, the labor unions would kind of disappear again because they, people were out moving away from home to look for other work, and they couldn't pay, union dues or fees to their organizations. And so that's something we will encounter our whole, labor history.
yeah. And it's always the working man's fault. It's never the guy at the top. Just remember that. Never the guy at the top is never at fault. I mean, no matter what kind of a bonehead decision he might have made on investments or buying materials or whatever, never his fault, believe me. Working in the melt shop with, we used to say to certain managers, do you know how to say thank you? We just saved you millions of dollars, and you don't know how to say thank you, but if we make one mistake, bammo, here comes the paperwork, killing trees. So anyway, 1842, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Hunt ruled that labor organizations were legal, provided that they were organized for a legal purpose and used legal means to achieve their goals. In 1858, the Sons of Vulcan formed. Earliest, I'd never heard of these people, but anyway, earliest organization that would through mergers become what today is the USW. The 1870s considered the longest, the strongest labor union in the U.S. The first National Labor Relations Agreement in U.S. history came out of that. In 1866, the Noble Order of Knights of Labor were organizing skilled and unskilled workers, and grew the number of 700,000 before the later organization, the AFL-CIO, American Federation of Labor, would attain much of this membership. In 1876, the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steelworkers was formed by merger of Sons of Vulcan and other unions. Membership would reach over 20,000 members. For the largest labor organization. The math didn't add
In
up.
the steel industry.
Yeah. So.
In November of 1881, Federation of Organized Trades and Labor Unions was organized in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. These were leaders of 8 different labor organizations. They attended this conference, and one of the leaders was Samuel Gompers. This organization would later become the American Federation of Labor, and that happened in 1886. In September of 1881, we saw the first Labor Day observed, and that was in New York. In 1886, we witnessed over 340,000 workers take part in a push to try to force an 8-hour workday. In 1890, the United Miner Workers were organized in a conference in Columbus, Ohio. In 1892 was a strike by the Amalgamated Association of Iron, Steel, and Tin Workers at the Carnegie plant in Homestead, Pennsylvania. In that event, you actually had strikers and Pinkerton guards were killed in confrontation, and even a lot of the strikers' family members were injured in some of the clashes. And ultimately, this strike at this plant it had failed, and Carnegie was able to oust the union at that time. And in fact, this action pretty much chased out unionism, and especially in the Pittsburgh region, all the mills there at the time. 1911, 146 workers, all women and girls actually, were killed in a fire at the Triangle Waste Company fire. But that event, it would lead to improvements in work conditions, especially in factories. So even though it was such a tragic event, we did find better working conditions from it. In 1914, the Clayton Act limited injunctions and would provide that picketing and other activities were not considered to be unlawful. You can grab that for a second.
Where is it here? It's one thing you got to remember that in 1892,
So we were able to picket at that time.
with Homestead, one of the big issues was that the working men ran the mill. Management ran the finances, orders, and all that stuff. But the working guys just wanted to have their own autonomy, which they had all along, and were very successful at doing it. Because if you had a problem with somebody, you took care of it. You didn't fool around with other things. You just went and took care of it. So, and that was one of the big plus. Carnegie and his big guy Frick wanted to cut wages because it's like any other thing in life. Cut my wages. How do I pay my bills?
And there were many workers at the time shared the same philosophy as Abe Lincoln, that labor was superior to capital, because you could not raise capital without labor, especially in this environment here, this hard type labor.
You need that. So, the 1919 steel strike, better known as the Little Steel Strike. The steel strike of 1919 was an attempt by the Amalgamated Association of Iron, Steel, and Tin Workers to organize the U.S. steel industry in the wake of World War I. During the war, you didn't ask for raises. You went ahead and did what you were supposed to do for the country. So anyway, the strike began on September 22nd, 1919, and collapsed on January 8th, 1920. Like many increased organizing efforts before, This followed the end of the war and the economic downturn. Economic downturn was all the guys came back from the war, and guess what? There were no jobs. They out of jobs because they weren't making steel to do this, to build ships and all that. So what happens? It's an economic downturn. But anyway, the U.S. steel industry witnessed consolidation, which we've seen in the last 30 years. Everybody wants to consolidate and get smaller, but what does it really accomplish? It puts a whole communities in a dire straits when it comes down to the tax base, the whole works. I mean, look here in Coatesville. I won't go any further. But let's see. The steel industry witnessed consolidation mainly through U.S. Steel and an increase in management rejection of union efforts. The AA did manage to have 365,000 workers strike over the demand to end the 12-hour workday, child labor, and union recognition. Ultimately, these efforts failed. About 70% of the strikers were more recent immigrants from Eastern Europe, most likely. Opposition was mounted by labeling them the foreign element, which, gee, I think that sounds familiar, and un-American honkies.
That's something we encounter time and time again, even in the time of the Steelworkers Organizing Committee. These were outside agitators, and they were un-American because they were Eastern European. And so, some of our workers wore buttons that says, "I am 100% American. I'm a member of SWAC." So
Economic.
just these patterns continue. The efforts ramp up in times of hardship, or where the workforces believe they had advantage, and then the efforts against them kind of mirrored earlier efforts against it.
The economic downturn and other pressures led to the strike's collapse. We would not see another labor effort in the steel industry for the next 15 years, mid-30s. 1935, the National Labor Relations Act, or the Wagner Act, established a labor policy which protected the right of workers to organize and to elect their own representatives for collective bargaining. There was, before that, it was always company unions. Company installed officers in, and they were kind of like this way. You had your hand back here, and they're filling it full of green stuff or whatever. But anyway. November 1935, the Committee of Industrial Organization, CIO, later the Congress of Industrial Organizations, was formed by several AFL-CIO, AFL international unions to foster industrial unionism. The Steelworkers Organizing Committee was formed by the CIO, headquartered in Pittsburgh with 150 organizers out of the United Mine Workers. You need to realize that if you've ever heard of, the hell their name, Mother Jones, okay? If you ever see books about Mother Jones, read them, because she was a heck of a woman for an old lady walking around hiding from thugs. She'd actually walk up streams for miles so that the dogs couldn't find her. And, but she would go to coal mines and kick the men around and tell them, you got to get your act together and join a union, because you're getting screwed every day on your wages. And they could instead of shoveling a ton of coal, you had to shovel a ton plus, to get paid for your tonnage.
Can I just
Go ahead.
just want to point out the canary on that pin there. The steel workers use that for our Workers' Memorial Day and other influences there. But the canary pays tribute to our beginnings here as steel workers, because of the CIO had offered up a bunch of organizers out of the coal miners union. So we go back to that. The canary always told the workers that the mine was safe to work in that day.
1937, the United States Steel Corporation recognized SWAC as the bargaining agent for its members. A 10% wage increase, an 8-hour workday, and 40-hour work week was negotiated, which was a blessing, I'm sure. You had a little time to yourself. My gosh. Anyway.
On July 8th, 1937, in a letter to all employees at Lucan Steel Company, announced it had entered into an agreement with the Steelworkers Organizing Committee for its members only. This agreement was only printed on a few pages. It was 13 sections long. It covered such issues as wages, hours, vacation. And vacation was like a 5-year employee got a week, where today we're eligible up to 5 weeks of vacation. You had seniority, defining a grievance procedure, kind of discharge issues, safety and health, and holidays. And at that time, 1937, the holidays were July 4th, Labor Day, and Christmas Day. Today, we're able to enjoy it, but usually I'm in there working, but it's 13 days. This agreement, the term of it was for less than a year, because they were going to sit down and talk about it again. And I believe through the Lucan's Plate newsletter, I believe it had affected 5,600 workers at the time. Just to give you an idea that the first agreement was only a few pages. Our current agreement with ArcelorMittal here, with the bargaining unit at the Coatesville facility, is 147 pages, and it covers a lot much more than just the few items they had discussed in them, the early agreement. Within 6 months of a formal announcement of SWAC itself, it had organized 154 facilities, and it had a membership of over 125,000.
Is that just Pennsylvania?
That was
No.
mainly Pennsylvania, but Ohio and Granite City, Illinois,
Great
and a
Lakes.
few other places.
Okay. United Steelworkers of America was established on May 22nd, 1942 by a convention of representatives from the Amalgamated Association of Iron, Steel, and Tin Workers and the Steelworkers Organizing Committee to create a new union of 700,000 workers. Local numbers were assigned starting with the number 1,000. So we were the 165th local union here in Coatesville. There was also 2 local unions here, 2295, I believe it was. Charlie Whitty was the president. I think he had the West, they merged together when in the early 80s, when the huge downturn in steel happened, and they had to combine the 2 locals. One makes sense with having 2 locals.
I've been told, and I haven't confirmed this, but I've been told that there's only one member from 2295 that's still working with us today, out of the Lucan Weld local.
That's right. Yeah. Okay, 1947, the Labor Management Relations Act Taft-Hartley passed by over President Truman's veto. Taft-Hartley amended the Wagner Act and included unfair labor practices for unions, outlawed closed shop, and allowed state legislatures to vote to prohibit union shop. In other words, the Right to Work Act. Okay. 1949, an amendment to the 1938 Fair Labor Standards Act finally directly prohibited child labor.
Finally, 1949. Finally.
1955, we had a merger of the AFL and CIO representing 16 million workers. The AFL-CIO was laborers, okay, non-skilled. CIO was more or less maintenance people, okay. That's what that was all about. And in 1964, the Civil Rights Act became law. Title VII equal employment opportunity, barred discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin in hiring, conditions of employment, apprenticeship, and union membership. My dad worked here for 7 years. I think he quit around 1943. And he said that it wasn't all racial, it was ethnic groups. I mean, everybody had their little spots in the locker rooms, and they're probably speaking the old country language in a lot of them. So,
Advance that. The Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970 was enacted by Congress, and it was signed by President Richard Nixon on December 29, 1970. It was created to ensure that employers provided workers with the environment free of recognized hazards such as toxic chemicals, excessive noise, mechanical dangers, and heat and cold stresses, and unsanitary conditions. The Act created the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, and the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH.
let's go back to World War II before we move on. There was a war labor board back in the 40s during World War II, and that kind of governed what workers and labor could get as far as their contracts were concerned. And the steelworkers and most labor unions decided that they would go along with it and not take any raises during the course of the war. When the war was over, then they were made whole. So, you know, and there was a lot like here with all the armor and shipbuilding, ship plate. It was a tremendous amount. So, anyway, we had, Lukens itself had many women working here to fill in where the men were missing. My late mother-in-law and her mother both worked here. My mother-in-law was a bee checker, and the grandmother was a grinder. She had to be hard and wired to be a grinder. It's not good for men, let alone women. Good Lord. Anyway.
When I was researching some of this, and I was reading a lot of Lukens Plate newsletters at the time, and it was about the time of the agreement, 1937, but they had a story of a co-worker who had probably missed injury or even losing his foot due to the end of a plate, gas cutting a plate, had fell on his shoes, and he had just purchased his steel-toed shoes 2 weeks before that. And at that time, it was still kind of optional because they were provided in the company store, but they weren't really required on the shop floor yet. So he was kind of glad that he did finally make that purchase, and I thought that was kind of interesting because I wouldn't go out on that shop floor in just street shoes.
Well, we had Washington Steel in '92 came in to observe us in our safety meeting. I was on the safety committee at the time, and we were talking about the melt shop and all, and I said, you got to be crazy to walk up on that floor without wearing your safety equipment, because you never know what's going to come next, you know. Something could be flying in the air and hit you in the eye or whatever, or fall on you. But I got a letter and a thank you from Denny Howe, who was he was a friend of mine. I'd known him for years, but they were kind of amazed that somebody would say that. Well, I mean, what do you get banged for the most? It's usually safety glasses. That's what you don't have on. And of course, I was lucky then I wore glasses, so it didn't matter to me. But anyway, the history. 1944, the Aluminum Workers of America voted to merge with the USW. Eventually, 9 more unions joined the USW as well. The International Union of Mine, Mill, and Smelters in 1967. The United Stone and Allied Product Workers in 1971, and District 50, which is heavy highway, more or less, big, like you see the Ukes going across the road with the slag and all that. They were partly District 50 back then. The Allied and the Technical Workers of America in 1972, the Upholsterers Union, International Union in 1985, rubber cork, linoleum, and plastic workers merged with us in 1995. Aluminum, brick, and glass workers union, the ABG, in 1996. The Canadian division of the Transport Communications International Union in 1999, and the American Flint Glass Workers Union in 2003. In June of 2004, the United Steelworkers announced a merger with 57,000 members of the Industrial Wood and Allied Workers of Canada, a major Canadian forestry workers union. In 2005, it announced that an even larger merger with Paper, Allied Industrial, Chemical, and Energy Workers International Union, PACE. They resulted with the current name of our steelworkers today, because we're not really the United Steelworkers. It's a name about this long now. They try to recognize everybody that's come in.
At the time of the PACE merger, and Steelworkers had put out a publication, they included a fold-out map, and they kind of showed it as, the rivers, the three rivers of Pittsburgh, that they represented all the unions that had merged to become the Steelworkers up until that point of 2005. But it goes back, to the AA, and back, in the furthest corners was that Sons of Vulcan, and it might be difficult to see on this slide, but they kind of represented that as the river valleys of Pittsburgh, because we're still headquartered in Pittsburgh.
September of '06, the International Oil Workers Union of Aruba, which represents refinery workers in the Caribbean island of Aruba, affiliated with United Steelworkers, becoming the first USW local union outside the United States, including Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands and Canada. April 2007, the USW merged with the Independent Steelworkers Union, 1,150 members at ArcelorMittal in Weirton, West Virginia, the steel mill, of course. And we recently merged with glass molders, pottery, plastics, and allied workers. Rivers.
So what we'll touch on here is kind of what the Steelworkers are today. And the next few parts of this discussion is some of our committees. And first one I'll talk about is the Women of Steel Committee. And Steelworkers found it beneficial not just to deal with what we deal with on the shop floor, but workers have issues away from the workplace, and there's things at home and with family and with travel and with everything the society brings to us. So one of our committees is the Women of Steel. We do have a member of Women of Steel with us tonight here. We do all kinds of things with one thing I'm personally involved with is a program in the Reading area, because that's where I live now. But with the Women of Steel Committee out of Local 6996, I go into a kindergarten classroom in the city of Reading School District, and I read to the classroom. We do that one Friday every month of the school year. So they end up with a handcrafted wooden toy, or it could be a train, or it could be a puppy, or it could be a fish puzzle, or it could be a Beanie Baby. But usually it's a handcrafted toy by handicapped individuals in the city or surrounding Berks County. But the children end up with a library of books, and I've been doing that with The program is called Reading is Toyrific, and I've been doing it with them for 6 years now. So I think Women of Steel is a good committee. There's one great for Dave.
SOAR, the Steelworkers Organization of Active Retirees, which I'm the head of it in Pennsylvania, our District 10. I haven't gotten across the Susquehanna to go west yet. I can't get across the Susquehanna. I can get up to Steelton and I can get to other places, but I just can't seem to get any farther. But our purpose is to bring, if you work with somebody for 30 or 40 years, what are you going to do? Just quit and walk away forever? You keep your relationships going. I enjoy going. I mean, even the old guys I only work with maybe a year or two. Good to see them, because they brought me along. They taught me what I had to know. And anyway, when the Bethlehem Steel debacle happened with the bankruptcy, taking the retiree benefits and everything, it was a great thing to have this organization, because we had 4 days of seminars to help people get their insurance. And it was a sad day, sad week. I mean, it was when you see women that are like 59 and 60, their husbands have passed away, and they're left with absolutely nothing. That is hard. And they're leaving there crying, and what are you going to tell them? Got to go here, got to go there. Try to guide them in the right direction. But there's a lot more purposes than just that. But it's good for people to get together, get your understandings together. Maybe you can settle a problem you had on the job 30 years ago, which happens at times. Some people carry grudges, some people don't. But anyway, we meet every month. And they're all supposed to meet once a month. We meet on the first Thursday of the month, except for summertime, and we go up to Dutch Way. They were just up there last week for a luncheon, and that's a good thing. I missed it.
But in the local meeting here, they always bring in representation from different agencies. Yeah, so not just steelworker issues, but anything they might encounter here, just everyday life in Chester County.
Yeah, it could be political, could be anything that concerns the community. And we got guys that come from all the way up in Reading and all around, and then we still have people in the mill who come all the way down every day from Bethlehem to work.
Yeah.
I think Freddie's still there. I don't blame him. But anyway, SOAR is an important part of it. It was formed back in 1986 by Lynn Williams, and then our international president, who thought, hey, this is a great resource. Supposed to get these people together, they can do things. If there's a strike, they can go picket. If other things, go knock on doors for political stuff, they can do that and make phone calls and all kind of goodies. And it's worked out well. We had cheese and butter giveaway back in the 80s when so many people were laid off in the mill. They did it up at 3rd Avenue where the laundromat is now. And retirees came up and did that. I just wish that I had spent more time with the old retirees back then, the Al Coopers and people like that, because they were such a wealth of knowledge about how it was here to get to where they were, okay, to where they got to be. So then you have rapid response.
Yeah, rapid response. That's our legislative effort in the Steelworkers, and it's all focused on workers' issues. And just recently, about 20 of us rapid response activists had gone to Harrisburg, and I personally visited every office of every Chester County state representative. And because we're kind of structured on the congressional district, that structure, there's 2 state reps that I visited for Berks County. But we had talked to them about expanding OSHA protection for public sector workers. That's and also which would benefit the Coatesville plant there. I talked to them about infrastructure spending in the state of Pennsylvania.
I was in the first class for rapid response in 1995, December. And I was supposed to leave Sunday to go to Linden Hall, which is south of Pittsburgh in Perryopolis, actually Dawson. And it's winter time. And there's one hill to get up to the main road to get to Linden Hall that's it's pretty close to straight up. It's a goodie. And you don't want to mess around in the snow. But anyway, my father-in-law died on Saturday, okay? So they said to me Sunday morning, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going out to Pittsburgh to class." "Well, Dad died." I said, "Well, I'll be back. I'll be back for the funeral. I'm not going to stick it to you that far. You know, I wouldn't do that." So I went out and left Tuesday night, came back for the funeral Wednesday, went to the wake, and then left there after about an hour and headed back to Pittsburgh. And they said to me, "We didn't think we'd ever see you again." I said, "Look, this is important, okay?" Which it was very important because it wasn't just rapid response, it was training a trainer to go to different local unions and teach them how to set up their shops, set up their little committees, and, you know, get organized. Get organized. And I don't know how many local unions I trained back in the 90s, but it kept me busy, believe me. And of course, back then there was copy machines, that, especially the one we had at the Union Hall. You had to better put some weight on the bottom because you're about ready to jump out the window. Going to doom, to doom, to doom, and hot in there. Oh my God, it was hot.
Our first mechanism in rapid response was the fax machine. So a lot of times that paper would curl up, and a lot of time we do it by text message, or we put out like a single page flyer. And this one here I brought tonight is about NAFTA. Well, actually the renegotiation of NAFTA, which they call USMCA. So this is a couple paragraphs describing a couple of the issues that steelworkers have with a new trade agreement that we would like to see changed. And it gives our members one phone number to call the switchboard at the Capitol, and it puts them in touch with their member of Congress. And we like rules of origin in the food. We should know where our meat comes from, or where shrimp comes from, or other processed food. And we still have a lot of issues with labor provisions in the new agreement. We just seen three of our activists, the steelworker activists, but with the mining in Mexico, have disappeared, and we don't know where these activists are. So Mexico isn't protecting our labor activists, and we'd like to see, more concentration on that. So we tell our members to contact their member of Congress, and if we're going to have new trade policy, it should be smart and beneficial trade policy. And another current one we're working on is safer workplaces, especially like domestic violence incidents, or someone coming in and disrupting a workplace with an incident. And we just want further protections. And we're not just in steel mills anymore as steel workers. We're nurses and policemen and adjunct professors in colleges now. So we try to help all of our members.
Yes, we do, and the communities.
Yeah, and our communities.
Communities. No. Go ahead.
You want to explain that one?
No.
Okay. One of our newer efforts is veteran of steel, and that's to address issues with our membership that have spent time in the armed forces. I'm a Navy veteran. Dave is an Army veteran. We're both signed up for this this committee, and hopefully it's something that we will expand on in the future. But it's pretty new to the steelworkers, and the National AFL-CIO also has Union Veterans Council. So we're kind of working with them to, address issues that our members face as veterans.
Yeah, in our SOAR chapter, we still have World War II veterans coming to the meetings, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Old Bill, the recording secretary, was a very good recording secretary. He's in his mid-90s at least.
Yeah.
He's got to be in his mid-90s, but he's sharp, still sharp. Fell and hurt something, I guess, but he's back. Not keeping him away. But in my generation, the Vietnam veterans, it's hard to get these guys to get out of their skin and come to meetings, And
We are 18 years into a war on terrorism right now, so we have membership now are veterans of the war on terror. And these are new issues here. They may have been battle injured or especially PTSD or what other conditions.
PTSD. I better be quiet. All right. Local 1165 is a combination of, we're amalgamated. This happened in the late 90s. The International Union decided there were too many small units out there. They needed to be combined so we could, after we complained about combining steel companies, we do it to ourselves. But anyway, Local 1165, 3183, which was Johnson Matthey, I believe, 5829, 5856, 7207, 8124, which was down on 202 on National Rolling Mills, 8264 and 8643 and 8119. We amalgamated into one local union, which we are today. We had one point in time had 2,800 members in the beginning, and maybe 22 shops, I believe it was, or places of work. And we're down.
20 when we amalgamated.
Yeah.
And the largest number now in our unit is 26, but we have lost some, through closure. We had one unit that actually had never lost money. Not even like quarterly, not anything significant, but all of their work, all their product went overseas. So they had no domestic customers anymore, so they moved their production overseas.
Shame of it all, isn't it? Greed doesn't work. It hurts the whole world. We continue to fight to keep a level playing field in trade, not just steel, but all trade. Workers' rights, justice and dignity, health care benefits, retirement, security, and more. And I have one of my biggest problems with the trade deal is, why aren't we beating on the companies that are buying this stuff? I mean, if you're going to buy steel from overseas, you need to get burned, and don't put it on the taxpayer and the people who are customers. I don't buy plates of steel, but why would they want to buy it from overseas when they know there's a problem, or any product, I think we're throwing the rocks at the Chinese. The Chinese are just smart businessmen. That's all, and took our jobs because we gave it to them. Our companies gave it to them. As far as the
You want to touch on some of these?
the former leaders, a guy named Alvarez was actually the first president of 1165. He was born in Mexico City, and I think he died maybe 10 years ago. He was Mexican, but through the years you had Benny Pilati, of course, who I knew very well. He was the Central Labor Council president, which I got to get this job off my back before I die in office. I don't want to be the next one, But Jack Fry, who's still around, he lives in Delaware now. He was the president of 1165 and the Labor Council president. And Harry Haynes was president.
It's a good thing we split them duties up.
Harry Haynes was the president of 1165. He was the president during the strike in '91. I got to give Harry a lot of credit. He kept us cool, didn't get all worked up. He was smoking Winstons that were about this long, and during that strike he quit smoking. He quit smoking, never picked him up again. I had to give him credit. Man, how the heck did you do that, man? You know, Lloyd Lawrence, who ended up being, he was a local union president, ended up on the international staff as a staff rep. Some guy by the name of McLimans. I was vice president of the local, and I was president of my other local at Bud Company, for Local 4588. And I've been president of the Labor Council for about 10 years too long. It's been, what, 25 years maybe, at least. Bill George, he was, he worked at Aliquippa at J&L back in the day. Billy I met Billy in 1974 at Penn State Labor Studies, and I was so impressed by him, we became long-term friends, still are. But Billy was, he could speak. He couldn't get your name right. He used to call me my melt shop name, Dave McLimans, which I didn't mind. Call me what you want. But Billy could fire up a crowd real fast, and he knew his business. But like he said Aliquippa, that mill, had their own bowling leagues and divisions of bowling leagues, softball leagues and stuff like that. They were so big. They had like 12 to 15,000 members back then. An 8-mile-long mill. Didn't know anybody at the other end. But Yi Brown, he was the chairman of the grievance committee at 1165, who died at Penn State in '79. He had a stroke and died. And he was also Labor Council president. Harry Cavuto, he was president, and he ended up going, when he retired, he got a job with OSHA actually it was Lancaster's office, I believe. But Ernie Wills, he was chairman of the grievance committee and treasurer for years, and when he retired, he got a job with OSHA.
He's still active with our SOAR
Still
unit.
comes to the meetings. Ernie's in his 90s. It's just, God bless him, you know. I hope I can make it that long. Maybe I can make it to 110. What do you think? Huh? I quit drinking because I'm diabetic. But if I could stay pickled, maybe I'd be better off if I could last long in a jar. So. We're the United Steelworkers, North America's largest industrial union.
Yes, we are.
Over 1 million members and retirees strong in the United States, Canada, and the Caribbean. We proudly represent men and women who work in nearly every industry there is. Our members are leaders in our communities, in our workplaces, in our governments, and more. Since our beginnings, we have been fighting for better workplaces, better lives for everyone, and for a better world. Before I left the melt shop and retired, I went in the office and I told Tom Barnett, I said, Tom, can you imagine what we could have accomplished together instead of you cracking the whip on us like we're not doing anything, and we're already processing 6 and 7 heats each turn. And if you'd have just left us alone and maybe said some things like thank you and a few little bit of incentives to make it a little bit better, because we're going to go to work to fight with people. I used to argue with Dave Wyrick when he was he was our shared manager between here and Steelton. I say, when are you going to put money in this place? I don't come to work to read the newspaper. I come here to make steel. If I make steel and you make money, guess what? I make money. And if we don't, we're going to make a whole lot less. So it's really a shame. Somewhere along the way, there's a management philosophy that's a little out of whack with what society really needs. And I think it's about time to start doing this. My father-in-law,
Real quick, some of that's not just management. It's just society as a whole. Yeah. I'm an electrician, and my main work is on the overhead cranes. and we can't move product around that facility without these overhead cranes running properly. And, well, you have hand wound coils to run these, contactors in and out. They're 80 years old, 100 years old. Now we get these molded plastic, and from wherever, but I won't go there, but these molded plastic things, they don't last a year, some of them. So when you had, electrical components that were built to last, you didn't have the maintenance downtime like you do today, because, some of the stuff is just made so cheap, and just, I don't know how it is economic to put in components that just they don't take the care like they used to.
Well, my father-in-law, late father-in-law, he worked at the paper mill in Modena. He was in management. When they shut that down for a while, he had to go to Reading, and he worked for Georgia Pacific. He was the corporate office manager and plant controller. So, we didn't do much talking about politics and union. But he did tell me one thing that I still hold true today, that whatever you do when you negotiate a contract, don't give so much back that it makes it cheap to close the place down, because it does. It takes money to close a plant, no matter what you do. Either they're going to lose money in one way or another, but no, we didn't do too much talking about work and politics, that was for sure. But whatever, that's the way it is. We survived. But I brought the pension and insurance agreement for Worth Brothers Steel. It was in Coatesville. There were 4 steel companies here at one time, believe it or not. Bethlehem, Lukens, Byproducts, Worth Brothers, who I think they ended up being Colorado Fuel and Iron, and moved to Claymont at one time, which is long gone. So I can see why it is some of our people that got fired went to Claymont to work. So their work ethics followed them. So anyway, thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah.
We do have a question from our Facebook audience. They're asking, why do you think Pennsylvania is receptive to unions as opposed to other states?
Why?
Yes.
Tremendous amount of history here. That's one thing. And if you work in a non-union shop, and there's a lot of them, it's a shame that people work for so much less. It's not about paying dues, okay? Somebody's got to pay the freight for the activities, grievances, arbitrations, your negotiations. But the dues are so cheap compared to what the money you lose without having a negotiated contract. They had a unionized group in the courthouse, Family and Youth Services, I believe it was, and they decertified. They didn't like the guy that was running their show. All I could say to them, well, you got to be the dumbest people in the place, because you at least had guarantees in writing of what you were going to be paid and what your rights were. Everybody else in this place doesn't have any rights. You're at will. Who wants to be at will where they can come in and fire you today because they don't like the color of your hair, or they don't like what you're wearing, or whatever? It doesn't matter. They don't have to have a reason. They can just fire you.
I think some of that too is, a steel community like Coatesville, but I also grew up in the Pittsburgh region, and these people had grown up in a society where everyone walked to work. Mm-hmm. And at the time, where our industry organized, they got better pay. They went from, a 12 or 15, 16-hour workday to an 8-hour workday. And it just, and we were a society that, we sat on the front porches and talked to each other more than we do now. And it is, and now we're all on social media and more isolated. But the time that like Pennsylvania and other places that unionized, those children saw the benefits of that, and so then they held those beliefs and pass that on to their children. And I'm kind of on the tail end of that, and I try to put those values onto my daughters myself. So I hope that answers that question.
Another explanation is that if you look at the states that are right to work, it's not the working people that want to be non-union. It's the people who are elected to office who rule. All right, and where do they come from? Big bucks, okay? How do you get big bucks? By screwing your worker. And I hate to say it like that, but that's the truth. I have been very fortunate in my life. The only time I was non-union was 3 years in the Army. And and talking back didn't work too well there. Tried, but it didn't always work. But you know, it's if you look at the studies that have been done in right-to-work states versus unionized states, there's a huge difference in wages, life, you know, your living way you live, workers' comp, unemployment. I mean, some of these states, they'll give you 10 weeks unemployment, that's it, goodbye.
Even education levels are different.
Yes.
In right to work, they, lower high school graduation rates, and fewer of the children go on to secondary education, beyond high school, and it's because you have more of a structured work week, and you're not in a unionized job. You don't tend to have 2 or 3 part-time jobs to get by. It's just good.
I might know some of the answer to this, but for the purposes of this recording, which I'm glad you're doing, one of the stereotypes that you hear out there in news or in general talk is that you don't want to join a union because you're going to be hit with high dues. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit further to that.
My dues, I make $27 an hour basically, and my dues are 1.4%. And I think comparable, a non-union steelworker now is maybe 10% lower in pay than I make, and probably a little bit lower in benefits as retirement security and health care. So I think that's a pretty good trade-off, 1.4% for about a 10% increase in benefits and pay.
I agree, yeah. Thank you.
Is there a change given how much change you've accomplished, with wages and everything, conditions?
Oh, yeah.
Is there a change in the role now that you see? Or?
Sure. There's one thing that a union is about, okay? First of all, it's not about protecting people from themselves. If you're not going to come to work, you don't belong there. And they wanted to fire one of the guys I worked with. He missed 10 days and called me, told me, hey, we're going to fire so-and-so today. So I said, okay, I'll be there. And Jimmy, you missed all these days. And he said, yeah, I know I did. And I said, well, Brian, where's your warnings and all that? Oh, we don't have that. I said, well, you're not going to fire this man today. You called him in here, but he's going to get a warning, and that's it. And I said, if you had done your job, we could have sat down with him together, counseled him. Maybe we could have straightened him out and not had this problem.
Right.
I mean, that's not what we're there for. We're about negotiating good contracts and things like that. That's what it's really all about. It's not about protecting bums, and that's what you hear all the time. Mm-hmm. And I've had to protect some pretty unsavory people, which I didn't like, but I had, you had a job to do. If you didn't do it, you get sued. So you do what you're supposed to do. But some of these, sometimes people can wear things a little thin, and they end up tripping on themselves. They trip over their own mistakes, and don't do it. Go do your job. That's what it's only 8 hours a day. Mm-hmm. 8 hours a day. That's all you got to do. And do your job well. So anyway, and you asked a question.
Yeah, I did. Do you take roles with other unions, like with the auto workers, where they shut down Lordstown
Uh-huh.
and and so on, how does that impact the steelworkers? Are they drawn into that at all? Do they
Well,
activate, senators like around that?
the mills in the Midwest make the sheet for cars. Am I correct?
Correct.
They make.
ArcelorMittal,
They
yeah,
make
we have
light
contracts
gauge.
for automotive,
Or do you?
yeah.
But-
But yeah,
They're gonna
we
be impacted by the,
Sure.
yeah,
Auto
we
workers
I
right
mean,
now.
we have like alliances between these unions, but also it affects the workload of some of our facilities too, and, and they're making some, especially truck bodies out of aluminum. That's like, we make steel, but other producers make aluminum, so it's always give and take. This is a fluid situation. Our work is fluid. We're not just, steelworkers are not just working in the steel mill anymore.
Yeah.
We are in every facet of industry and service industries even. So
It's important.
Yeah.
My wife worked for the commissioners and she couldn't be union. But when she retired, she reminded them that she couldn't do it at her age, retire at her age, if it wasn't for my good steelworker pension plan and benefits. Because without it, I might not be retired. I'd be over at Home Depot working or something, And when you retire, you're supposed to retire. Be happy you are retired. That's what it's all about, Work so many years so you can get out and kick back and relax a little bit in life. Mess with the grandchildren.
Can you gentlemen talk a little bit about your history with striking? In the history of steel, you hear Homestead Steel Strike, which was months long, led to deaths of multiple people.
Yeah.
It's certainly a little bit different today in terms of striking. Can you talk a little bit about why steel workers today might strike, what that strike might look like as well? Or if you had one in the past in the 90s, I know Coatesville had one, if you want to talk about a little bit about that as an example.
I've been on strike 3 times. 2 times at Bud Company. First one, I'd been there 3 months, so I really didn't care. I was off. I didn't have to worry about going to work those days. But the next one was in 75, and we made decent gains. 5 weeks, okay? You lost all that money, yeah, but we think of what we're making on down the road. Then in 91, we really didn't go on strike. We were kicked out of the mill. When people were working in the middle of their shift, they're told, put it down and get out. And that's what happened, okay? Put it down and get out, okay? You're right in the middle of a heat in the melt shop. Put it down and get out. What in the world, are you crazy? I mean, at least give us a right to say yes or no. But the biggest problem was the company, Lukens, had bragged about making $100 million a year before. I still have the newspapers, all right, where they were bragging about it, and all they wanted was give back. You don't need this, and the heck you don't. You're trying to progress in your life. You don't want to go backwards. Why should you go backwards? And it ended after 105 days. But what we did when we did go back to work, we set a standard for the rest of the steel industry, and it lasted for a few years, which means a lot. Everybody, oh man, I'll take that signing bonus. Yeah, well, you can't get that signing bonus on your vacation pay or things like that. You want to have an actually hourly increase so that you can see the results as you go through the year. Work overtime, you get time and a half and all that. I had a state rep tell me that he at the union he worked at GM in Delaware for a summer. He said, well, the union made the company pay me time and a half because I worked a double. And I said, well, that's what they were supposed to do. He says, well, no, but I only moved 4 hoods. I said, then in your lazy capacity, you should have gotten a broom and swept the damn floor. That's what it's about. You're here to clean up, here to do your job, whatever. I mean, nothing's a freebie. Nothing's a freebie.
I not experienced a strike in my 25 years here If it, my father did, they had a strike at his facility. He was a steel worker, and I was about 8 years old. It was in the middle of winter. I remember standing around the burn barrel at the plant entrance, and there was a couple of potluck dinners we had went with other families. It was in the tavern. It was actually in a dining room area of a tavern across the mill where he worked. But because I started at Lucan's a few years after their strike, I kind of have a habit of keeping 3 months of what I would need to get by in my bank account. I don't even touch it. I know it's there. If I would ever have to endure 105 days, I have that in the bank. But I try to visit picket lines all the time. Went to Lansdale for the auto workers just recently, and there was a steelworker unit in Reading that was locked out for a few years, and I went to their picket line as a habit, because it's always a good idea to show solidarity. So.
Well, when we were on strike, there were groups coming here. They had taken gate collections that were out wherever they were. And I know the auto workers in Delaware, they would come up with big piles of money, which was good. We needed it to sustain ourselves. And I remember the '59 strike, which was a long one. I know all the neighbors were either painting houses or doing carpentry work or something, because they weren't working. But it was a long strike. Made a lot of headway, though. It's just like with this pension and insurance plan here. This is 1949, but they improved upon all this stuff through the years. You know, I couldn't be retired today, not with no pension.
I believe it was Steelworkers Organizing Committee through Bethlehem Steel that really gave workers in the steel industry a pension, a defined pension. I think that was the first contract, and then other employers had to follow. If you're going to compete, you're also going to have to compete with the benefits that other producers were giving to their workers.
You've heard a lot of people say, "Screw the union, I don't need one." The guys that I used to work with that were officers say I didn't need a union. I said, "Oh hell no! Over in your shop over there where you were making nose boxes for those trailers and smoking a joint about every other hour, if they'd have caught you, who was going to need a union? You were, dummy. Don't come to me with that crap. It just makes me. It makes my blood curdle when I hear people say that. They just don't get it. I mean, who protects your Social Security, Medicare, and who has like with OSHA? Nixon really probably didn't want to sign it, but he didn't have any choice because he'd better sign it. And the ironic part of it was I was laid off for a week, and 3 of us came to the education center up at 9th Avenue, back when the building was still used for that. And we did a seminar on OSHA. There was like 10 of us in the room, 3 of us and 7 other people. Nobody introduced themselves in the beginning. The old guy running the seminar at the last day said, "Now I want everybody to introduce themselves. Where'd you come from? Where are you from?" Well, we introduced ourselves as steelworkers, and the other guys were all upper management trying to get out of complying. I mean, come on, guys. That's why they passed the law, because of people like that who would do everything to get around the subject, solve the problems. Solve your problems, man. We don't need to be fighting about it. That's not what it's all about. Settle the problems. So.
Yeah.
Dawn.
I was in the mill during that strike, and the last couple contracts that they negotiated, it was kind of scary a couple times.
Sure.
But the mindset of the people in there now is way different than it was in the '90s, and I don't know what would happen to that place if there was ever a strike again. What do you think, Vonie? You're in there.
I would hope we would stand strong and fight for what we feel is fair and just. I don't know, but it's a different society. Everyone's on their phone, and isolated from. We were a more threaded, society at one time. We are not that way anymore, and
These guys,
we're still generational in there,
Right.
but not like we were.
Right.
We have a lot of coworkers that haven't brought up the way that we had witnessed. So,
but we have so many material things now that we have to pay for. We got boats,
Right.
we got cabins, we got and those guys in there couldn't live without a paycheck.
No.
And they thrive on overtime,
sure.
the way it is now. It's just so different.
Well, I think there should be a limit on overtime, honestly. I mean, so many extra turns a week. Hire somebody, for Pete's sake, hire another guy off the street who needs a job, who got a family to raise, trying to work 2 or 3 jobs to survive, and be nice to have, well, my son-in-law just got a job in the mill, finally. His dad worked there 35 years before he died, and I'm glad he got in finally. I'm glad he finally got in, because it's a better paying job. And I left Bud Company, and my foreman and I started here the same day from Bud Company. And I knew my foreman was making a lot more money than me, but we got our paychecks the next week together, and I said, did they make a mistake? What the hell was I doing up there all those years? I should have been in this place. And he said, yeah, he says, I'm making a lot more money too. So, whatever. We'll take it. So.
Any final questions? Final comments from you two?
Well, again, I do appreciate you come out and shared this evening with us, and I'm glad it is recorded for future reference. And I appreciate my friend Dave here for sharing a lot of his insight, and we were able to at least give you an idea who we are and a little bit of our history. So thank you.
Yeah, if you want to hear stories, just stick around. I'll tell you lots of them.
The end we want to.
Thank you.
Well, thank you both, and thank you all for attending. If you do have some time tonight, we do have a wonderful labor exhibit up on the walls in this room, some great photographs, a little bit of a history of the union as well. And there are a couple of object display cases in this room as well as outside that have some union objects and more labor objects related in there as well. If you did fill out the card, I can take those and enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
How you
I
doing? What's
appreciate
your
it. I
name?
met you, Bob Holiday.
Oh,
Met you at
yes, I will
United
go around
Way.
and get those.
Oh,
I
okay.
can't remember who the chair was. He was
Oh,
the
I don't
dearest
know.
guy.
My last meeting
He
was
was
the
the
day
older.
that he said they were talking about getting money from the horse people. This has been a long time ago. And they said they needed to go down to Unionville and start getting money out of the horse people to help fund the thing.